Hi everyone to a new episode of our series Tech Interviews. Today with Max, Senior Solution Architect at AWS. Hi Max, thanks for joining.
Hi Ron, good to be here.
Let's start with the, I believe, obvious question. What do you do, or what does it look like to be a senior solution architect at AWS? What's your day-to-day job look like?
Yeah, that's a very good question to start with. So, yeah, as a solutions architect, essentially I work together with AWS customers. And I help them along their journey in the cloud. So what I do a lot is architecture reviews with their dedicated teams working on projects in the cloud. I help them with migrations. I help them to optimize their workloads for performance, cost, reliability, security. And so we look together at the specific app, for example, that they want to build. And we have a session together and we see what could be here optimized in the topics that I already explained, and then guide them along the way. Mm-hmm. This is one part, so this is around, I would say, 50% of my job. And the other part is because I see a lot of different architectures. So over the last 3 years, I've seen probably over 100, 150 or even more different architectures. So I get a lot of different perspectives, unique challenges, opportunities. Mm-hmm. So I gather them and I create some content out of it. So I write maybe a blog about that around best practices, how you would do certain things. I speak a lot at conferences where I share the work, so we share best practices also. So there are also some talks recorded. We have our own large conferences like AWS reInvent and our AWS summits. And there I share then to a broader audience on how you would most efficiently run applications in the cloud. I think those are like the two core parts. And yeah, I think the last part would be, as you know, information is really flooding in our segment. I really need to stay on top of that. So I took a big portion also in basically learning and staying up to date with the latest technology. So I would say that's roughly the 3 core parts.
Nice. So I noticed 2 things, right? Mm-hmm. First is only half of your day-to-day business is actually working with the clients for like helping them out for AWS. And the second is more of an advocate, right? Which is pretty interesting when you look at normal jobs, when you look at like classical jobs in companies where the focus is always to produce something, to, I don't know, make it happen, do the sprint. And we focus less and less, unfortunately, on really bringing content out there, being a real advocate for or evangelist for, I don't know, that company, that technology, that architecture, whatever level you're at. So this is, I believe, pretty interesting. And
I would just add to this. So I think 50% is to customers is half of the story, because I would say, so as you probably have heard at Amazon in general, we always put the customer first. So we are quite a customer-obsessed company. So doing 50% is more that one-to-one work with the customer itself. Now the advocacy, so to say, or actually sharing the best practices is also pretty much customer focused, because, and I see it more as a multiplier, because if I talk to customers one-to-one, right, I know their dedicated team, but at conferences or with blogs, I can reach a much broader audience. Correct. Right, and help them all at once. So I use that more as a multiplier then of the things that I gather in those one-to-one conversations.
Yeah, makes totally sense. And the second thing I noticed is, and I believe this is really important when you look at the dynamics of like bigger companies or like different strategies. You mentioned that after looking at architectures, after seeing their implementation, after looking at the way they solve certain problems for customers, then you come and say, hey, this is my finding, right? These are the findings I noticed. And this is a totally another approach from the classical consultancy company where you come and say, this is the way to go. And this is pretty interesting. We had a conference called Code Camp, and there was a guy from the UK, Kelvin something, in a workshop the day before. And this was exactly the way he treated things. Always to gather information. Even the books he wrote and put together were different statements from different people. So which is a totally another approach from me telling how it should be done. And is it common at AWS to do that? I mean, to see this is the market, these are the clients, these are the solutions out there. We don't want to imply a way to do it, but we show based on real world scenarios the way others solved it.
Yeah. So we always want to work backwards from really customer problems, and also that solutions our customers work on. So usually we therefore derive those best practices from things that are actually happening in the real world. So what you don't see is that we say, okay, this is service X and this is service Y and this is service Z and they can do X, Y, Z. It's more like this is the problem that you're trying to solve, and those are services or maybe features that can help you achieve that specific goal. So it's always pretty much related to a customer problem that someone has been used, and I think that worked out pretty well. And I also feel, at least in the audience, when you tell them those real world use cases, you make it more tangible so that people can relate to it. They know the context of a product rather than a list of features from a given service. So that's why I think it's quite crucial to have that.
Exactly,
approach.
And they can associate their problem, like mentally at least, do a correlation between their problem and something that you tell instead of saying, hey, this is an architecture, use that, and maybe it doesn't fit. So before going deeper into AWS, how you got your job, what others can do to be your colleague, right, in a way or another, I would be really eager to find out what your life before AWS was like, because for sure coming to into such a position implies that you have a certain background. It implies that you have a certain experience. So telling everybody that looks at you right now, what's your experience? What makes you, what gives you the credits to be in this role? Right?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, I think it started quite some time ago. So before joining AWS as a solutions architect, I've been an SDE, so software developer, for my entire life almost. So I started when I was 15 in Austria with an apprenticeship. Right, so this is where you do like 3 or 4 years at the company, and then you have also some school related to the work, but then after those 4 years you get like a certificate, and then you have like this apprenticeship and I think back then it was called application development. So I started off there when I was 15, so 17 years ago I would say, and that was still written in Delphi. I'm not sure if you know that, with Object Pascal. Yeah. So you drag the button on a form.
Delphi 5, I believe. Was
I had XE something, I remember. And then you just did a double click on the button, and then you could attach code to what it should do on the button. So you're basically coupling the UI to the actual.
I moved from Visual Basic, to Delphi. And then I remember my first application was a notebook for my dad, because he wanted to do, that was the first application in Delphi, because he wanted to have a notebook together with like numbers and information about all his contacts. And that was the first application. And then he put his numbers in and had then when we didn't have like smartphones and everything, we had like normal Nokia phones with like no display.
Yeah, and I think it's a very low entry barrier, right? Because it's called, right, what you see is what you get. So you just put the button, you do something, and then you write your logic to it.
Double click, you select the method of interaction, and then you put your function in. And then
I mean, after a couple of years later, so I wasn't really proud of the code that I've written, because obviously you have a lot of that code then coupled to the UI, so it was everything entangled there. So I didn't necessarily learn good software development at that time, but it gave me a good start on things what was possible. So I saw that then from other people been using. So I've been there at that company and then switched to another company where I've also been Delphi developer mostly, which was called Valta Software, which is one of the largest software creators for ski schools, actually, because I'm from Austria, right? There are a lot of snow in the winter.
It's your main export material, right?
Yes, exactly.
Ski vacations.
Yes. And so therefore there was that ski school applications where you could book courses and also online. So I developed quite a long time, I think 5 or 6 years after my apprenticeship in that company. And then then I got more also into that backend development. So I got a bit released from putting everything in a Windows desktop application to writing then like the first backend services that are reachable via API, then with Java or Python and things like that. And from there it evolved, and I think that was in my early 20s. And at some point I realized I want to maybe see how universities also look like, because I learned everything by the job, which is a very good thing. It's also very practical, but sometimes I was thinking I would like to get the foundation also, and
the academic side of it.
Yeah, the academic side of it. Let's see how it does. And then I started doing, because I didn't have what is called Abitur or Matura in Austria.
Baccalaureate, it's called.
So I didn't have the permission to go to university in simplified terms.
Yeah.
So I had to do that in a course. So that was an evening course. So after the job, I went there, did the course to get the certificate that says Max is allowed now to study, and it was called software design back then at the university. And I did that, and it was also mostly based, it's quite hard back then to find such a study, because most of them were throughout the whole week, but I was working my entire life and I couldn't just drop everything and now start and just go to university. And it might potentially be possible, but I was not that brave, I would say, at that point. So for me, only the courses that are on the weekends or the evenings would work. And there was one university, FH Joanneum, it's a Fachhochschule, and they offered software design. So, and design not from UI perspective, but really design from an architecture perspective, like patterns.
There are a lot of people that still do not understand the difference between software design and software architecture.
Yes.
So
Sometimes I get the same feeling.
A struggle with a lot of, even with architects.
Yeah, true. So I did that then besides my day job. So I reduced the hours a little bit to accommodate everything. And then I completed the bachelor there after 3 years. So bachelor in software design. So it was my mid-20s. And I think then the most important part happened. So in the meantime, I also switched company to do more Java development in Innsbruck. So before that, I was more working in villages outside of Innsbruck, which is like the capital of Tyrol, like the state in Austria, where all the mountains are. So I worked then in Innsbruck for Cloudflight or Catalysts, they were called, so which is like a software fabric, so to say. So I developed a lot of different applications for larger clients. And there also did Java mostly. And so when I finished the bachelor's, then an important thing happened. So my wife, Anna, she wanted to work in abroad. And she was looking for a job in Berlin and some other capitals. And that in Berlin worked out. And I said, okay, I guess it's Berlin then. So let's try it. And then I realized, I think this was 2019, Berlin is a pretty awesome place for software developers because you have so many things to choose from. Because if you're in Tyrol, you have like 10, 20, 30 companies that you know where everyone is kind of working. But now you have a lot of possibilities in Berlin. So I joined a startup called Ada Health. So they have, I think this was one of the most popular health tracking health companions in the App Store. So you could put your symptoms and you get asked some questions, and then at some point you would get, it's very likely that you have XYZ, for example. And I worked there in a team mobile that wrote the backend for those for this mobile application, and it had back then I think 8 million users or something. So it was then suddenly I was exposed to some scale, and messing up things in production really caused things to happen and people calling you. So I got more and more responsibility, And I had a pretty great team there. So, and at that point, so I then was a couple of years already into like software development and things. So I started to get a sense more for patterns. So I started taking the design stories. So whenever a new feature comes in, right, I then went to the whiteboard or with the colleagues saying and brainstorming what would work, how can you decouple things. And I really enjoyed doing that because after 10 years of fixing any tiny JSON serialization error that froze in the logs, at some point I got a bit tired of it, and I didn't want to care about any tiny detail of the implementation anymore, but go a bit of an abstraction, a bit more of an overview. And and that was at that stage.
And you did that without having the formal role, right?
No, so that was back then. So I was a normal SDE back then also, but then as a colleague left and I became the, so to say, team lead, Java team lead. So I reviewed then also the PRs there and things like that. So I slowly grew into that role.
I just wanted to figure it out because we had a lot of people that want to do these kind of transitions, right? And we talk with a lot of like being it colleagues, friends that are in this industry, and a lot say, I want to do that because, as you said, like we are tired to always implement things. We don't want to go that deep anymore. We want to have an overview, take decisions, architectural decisions, whatsoever. And a lot say we cannot do that without having the role. And this was why I asked, did you do that before having a kind of role where you're supposed to do that? And the role came natural, or did you get the role and then you started going to the whiteboard? That was so that's an interesting question. So there are, I think, a lot of different people in camps who see that a bit differently. So one say there should be an architect role, and the other one, architecture is something that should evolve out of the team itself and from a discussion. So you don't have that ivory tower architecture that just say you should do this and is completely detached from actually what is going on. I think that's not the best approach. So I would say it evolved, but there was never that specific role, you are now the architect. I think it evolved that then people said, oh, let's ask Max on how to do it. And then there were more overarching roles, more in the director. There were things like technical directors who would then discuss with me the architectural stuff. But that naturally evolved, and I didn't have like an architect tag attached to the role. This is
or
awesome
something.
because when you see people that got in their career at a certain at a certain point, right? And you strive to be like them. And you say, hey, I really want to do what that guy did, that woman did. It's important for the ones that listen to us to also understand the fact that you need a certain personality. You need a certain way to approach things.
Yeah.
And even like getting as a senior solution architect at AWS, right? And your path to go there, you just did things without having to do things. You did things out of whatever role you had in order to, I don't know, evolve, do more, be on a more high level. And then the opportunities came after.
Exactly.
For me, it's really important to point this out when I find someone that's like you, right?
That's
and not,
very
I got promoted and now I do this.
And now I'm the architect.
Now I'm the architect, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting and good point, because I often see also, I think there needs to be the work first. So you need to be, I'm not sure if you've probably read Gregor Hope's book on architecture elevator, right? There is that also concept of an engine room and things like that. So approaching things from different levels. And I think, at least from my perspective, I think you should got your hands dirty first before you then evolve to that next abstraction level. At least that's my perception, what worked for me the most. So I think it's quite hard to say, okay, I'm fresh out of university and I want to apply for an architect role now. Because what is the experience you're basing your decisions on, right? So at least I can look at the certain challenges I had in the past. How did the teams work in that companies that I worked with? What worked out well, what didn't? And so I think that's a very essential part of my role, and my knowledge today was actually the work as an SDE, then evolving into an architect. But I think it's quite hard to just start as an architect without having any implementation knowledge before. At least for me, I always need to base it on some form of experience, hands-on experience. Yeah.
And this is also extrapolated a little bit. This is also when you're in a team. We try to do always in our podcast this kind of educational moment, right? For people that listen to understand how the world works. And then we try to find these situations where we can go deeper into that. And this is why I'm focusing on that. It's the same when you are in a team. And when you are in a team and you want to do things like, I don't know, decide, you also need this kind of runway, as you described, not only when you're getting hired, but also you cannot be promoted to the architect or be promoted to the tech lead or be promoted to whatever role you have in your company, and all of a sudden you will start doing it. You should do it naturally. You should help your current architect. You should already do things or do those things, and then the role comes naturally.
Exactly.
Hey, who's doing those things? I don't know, John. Okay, then let's make him the official architect.
Yeah, we have a similar concept when we talk later a bit about AWS, right? There's also things when you do promotions or things like that, it's always called operating at the next level. So at some point you usually get promoted when you're already operating at the next level. So that means you also need to show that you are capable of doing those things. And this is very ties into what you've just saying, right? So do the job you want to do, and then it will naturally essentially come to you. And that was that stage at Ada at some point. And then I think after a year, so there were a lot of like some people also leaving, and the team fell a bit apart that I worked with together. And then I had an old offer still. So when I come to Berlin, I got, I think, 3 different offers that I could pursue. I think one was Ada and Zalando and I think eBay or something. And then I thought, okay, I think Zalando would be quite interesting from the scale perspective, right? So it's a very big fashion store, right? So I thought, that would be interesting. So I approached the old engineering manager that I used to have the interview with.
When was that?
It was 2020, I think. Yeah. So it was a year after I've joined Ada, actually. And so I approached Dirk back then. I said, is the role still open? Do you have any position? And I said, it's open. Let's see. I had to redo one loop or something, one interview. And then that worked out, and I got to Zalando. And there I then also immediately, because what I was practicing or evolved into at the previous company, I started doing immediately now at Zalando as well. So when there was a software or system design kind of task or design story, I think it was called in the sprint, I came up with the proposal in Word, and I wrote and and I sparred it with the team to get their feedback and evolve it from there. Define the interface points, decoupling points, some messaging between services. How do you decouple them? How do you make them resilient independently? And that, I really loved doing that. So it was also then mainly Java backend developers who actually implemented the things I designed. And then I was pretty happy at that time. But then AWS approached me. And I would say, I think at that time I said I wouldn't have left. I would have only left for one company at that point, and that was AWS. And I said, okay, let's give it a try, the whole recruiting process. I heard rumors about it and how much you need to prepare and things like that. So let's see. Let's just try. And in the end, it somehow worked out. And and I think now it's 3 years since I've joined AWS. So this is roughly the story, starting with Delphi, Java backend, moving the abstraction layers, and then that was then the solutions architect position.
So you joined as a solution architect, and then you promoted to senior solution architect
later. Yes. Later. Exactly. Yeah.
So.
That's also a good perspective, because I somehow get the feeling also that just because you're a senior also at one company, it doesn't necessarily mean you're
For sure.
senior at the other company. So that I had to also set my expectations a bit different. Also like principal engineers, right? Just if you're principal at a very small company with 5 people, it's different than if you're principal engineer at Amazon or something like that, right? So sometimes I think you don't need to be too attached to your titles. Correct. To say I only join when I get senior or something, but to see the opportunity that you can grow and then also grow into that role again.
I believe something in that mindset that is also really important, and we always try in different rounds to like talk people or coach them to understand these things, because those are from the outside. I don't know if you can say it, but I will still ask the question. You can say no.
Yeah.
But it's important. You mentioned a senior in one world is not a senior in another world. Maybe the titles differ. Somebody has, one company has 4 levels, another one has 2 levels, right? And things like this. It's interesting. How do you see it with the salary? Because you say, hey, I'm moving from a senior position to a non-senior position.
Yeah.
So is your mindset also, I need to accept a pay cut because it's not the same level and I then work up? Or is it, the title is not so important, at least I have the money?
So I think, it always depends on your life situation. So I think it's quite hard to generalize saying money is never important, because you don't know what other people's background are, what is their family situation and things like that. So I think it's already a privileged statement if I say, okay, money was never really a motivating factor to do things, right? Because that might be true for me, but it might totally not work for other people, right? So I think this is always the balanced view. So I would say you will always need to see the opportunity behind it. So let's say, okay, I'm going from senior, I'm going to now what is it, mid-level engineer or something, but at a much larger scale. So I will be exposed to much larger problems. I will grow much faster than I would do in my senior role, maybe at that company currently.
So even though I get a pay cut right now and I accept something lower, the curve
eventually, after then 3, 4, maybe 5 years leaving that next company, you are then in a completely other situation and in a completely different negotiation. So you need to, at some stages, you need to invest in your career, and I would see that as an investment.
That's pretty smart. It's pretty smart to frame it like this. We need to invest in a career. I know now I earn, I don't know, 80K, right? Just to throw numbers, because to say I earn now 80K as a senior, but I know in this company I can go only to 90. And then I accept 70K at another company because I know there I have another growth potential and maybe I get to 140. Right? That's exactly an investment in your career, which is a pretty smart way to frame it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it's also similar to what you have mentioned before, where you said the things as the architect role comes to you, and I think it's similar like that. So as you get more and more experienced and more to the next level, so to say, while doing that investment, so you're joining a new company or role and you're growing and growing, then naturally at some point those larger opportunities then find you and come to you. But I mean, also you have to say that you can't even also compare the senior level to mid-level between companies, because sometimes the mid-level engineers at that company earn more than the seniors there.
Based on the company.
And then usually if you go for big tech, it's, let's say, they are not known for let's say paying the minimum salary, so to say, right? So usually you also have quite good opportunities, as well as also the financial aspect, and depending on your role and your maturity, and your track record, where you come from, also looks quite okay in that sense.
And when you joined, I just want to, I took some notes, right? And because I don't want to miss some interesting questions, because AWS is for sure one of the big companies, right, out there. And people are interested how it looks like, how your life at AWS looks like. And I believe it's different from, I personally have friends that work at Amazon, at Amazon products like Prime or the shop or whatever, which is totally different, obviously, from the one that is AWS, which is a totally another league or another approach. So AWS is obviously more interesting for a lot of people, especially these kind of overarching roles where you have also time to write blog posts, you travel a lot. So, but one important point is always this level system.
Okay.
What does it mean? Because we heard a lot of rumors, right? When you do interviews, I can tell you the rumors and then you can say check, not check, right? It's like this, right? I asked once another solution architect, how do you hire? And he said, like, we hire based on the levels, like you you come in at level 4 or something like this, because everything below is like entry level, and then or 5, and then you always have an interview with somebody that is a level lower, and they need to say that you're better than them.
Okay.
So I don't know, is it true or is it fake news?
So I think you couldn't put it like that. So it's very hard, first of all, to do a generalization, because there are also levels are different perceived, if it's like more of the management roles or if it's an SDE or solutions architect. So I think that's in general
you have separate
a bit
levels for them.
Sorry, no. So I mean the I think, and you can also Google them. So there are certain levels that are just numbered, right? So
correct.
L4, L5 or something like that.
Bezos is 12 or something like this, right?
Yeah, so it can go very, very high. But then I think the question is, so what is the role you're interviewing? And you see that when you interview. So when you go to Amazon Jobs or something, so you then see associate solutions architect, senior, or principal. So usually it says that in the job. In the job title, and we have a very and this is also, we have a lot of articles around that. We have so-called bar raisers that are also part of the interview process at a certain level. So they ensure that we're really hiring the top talent, right? So, and this is very an essential part. So we always strive for getting better people into the company, because then accelerates the internal motivation of people who are already there. You get a lot of new perspectives if you hire people that are smarter than you already. So it's really something that accelerates then over the long term, at least from my personal experience.
And how could I imagine an AWS interview would look like?
So yeah, so usually there are a couple of stages. So I think that also depends. So for example, if you're interviewing for an SDE role or something, right, then you might have coding tasks. If you do something like solutions architect, you might have more like some system design and things like that. So it's also hard to generalize that. It really depends on your actual role. But usually you have the initial outreach, and then you do like a phone screen or something where you talk to one person, and then at some point you have what we call also a loop, and then in the loop you usually interview with 5 different Amazonians, and
not at the same time.
Not at the same time. After each other, right, with some breaks and so on in between, and then it will be decided if you will get hired or not.
Interview. So you have one interview, and then I come in, and after 10 minutes, another person comes in.
No. It's 5. I think it's
separate interviews.
5 separate interviews.
Nice. Yeah. So basically, the because it's interesting in Romania. If you look, a lot of companies, because they do not focus on top talent, they focus on numbers. How many employees do I have? Right? Hire after the screening. You go to a company and then they say, hey, we like you. Join us. Here is the offer, right? And then when companies come and have actual interviews, like, hey, we have a technical interview, we have a team fit, we have a cultural interview, we have a coding interview, we give you something to do at home, and everybody freaks out. Everybody is like, why? What the fuck is going on here? Right? Why do I need to... so many steps? I just want to tell you who I am, and then you throw the offer at me, right? And it's interesting to hear that real companies that really base their expertise on talent that are part of the top companies in the world, actually have like 6-7 interviews, right? At least based on the role. So it is common if you really want to focus on quality.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we have also this bar raiser role. So this is really then a role. So one of the interviewers then would be the bar raiser, and that ensures that we are keeping the bar high, right? So that we ensure that we hire top talent and therefore have a consistent experience, so to say, right? So I think it's not really, I think filling a role, so that's my personal opinion, but filling a role just by filling it, I think is probably the wrong approach. You really want to find the right person to do the job pretty well, right? So if I, as you described, so if you just get the offer after we said hi and we like each other and it's kind of, there's a vibe between us, and just give you the offer, but then after 2 months or something, we realize we have completely different ways of working, completely different mental models on how to approach things, on how to work on it. I mean, then it's also quite an investment then afterwards to maybe then get another employee, do all that process again, right? So we just want to ensure you have the high bar at the very beginning. So then we can ensure, or at least in most of the cases, right, we can then be sure that we have a common standard, so to say, on what to work. And for me, when I joined, it was quite impressive, because I saw then all those talented folks, and you get quite fast, you get an imposter syndrome. It's like, maybe I somehow, I don't know, maybe I somehow, I'm not sure how I got here. It must be by accident or something, because the folks are really all knowledgeable. And I've been at a couple of companies, and I've seen that rarely that I have that density of high quality or talented people in the same company team room. For me, that was very rare. So that was overwhelming for me in the first place. And I said, can I learn a lot from this guy and a lot from that girl, and so on and so forth. So that was really something that stood out for me, where I said, okay, this is why also we have that hiring process and all the mechanisms behind it, because this is really something that every new employee also benefits a lot, and it's a great place to learn then in the first couple of months then as well. Really, and even now,
really interesting. So next is what, principal solution architect, right? I
so
picked it up.
So after senior, there you also see a lot on LinkedIn or at the presentations from reInvent. Then principal solution architect is also a thing. There's also senior principal solution architect at some point. But that's roughly.
And is it something that you get based on also on time? I mean, can you be associate solution architect for 10 years?
So I think it depends a bit. So from the entry point, so it's never a promotion. I would say is also never based on time, right? You need to prove, as I said, that ties back to what we've discussed. You need to show that you're operating.
I took note. Operating at the next level,
right? Yes. And some people take longer to do that, and some people can do it faster, right? But I think there is no reason, if you are operating at the next level, and Amazon is a very data-driven company, right? So you really need to prove that you're operating at the next level, right? So you need to have the data on how you performed, how many people you reached with the content, or you get feedback, right, from customers or something like that.
How is it, for example, as a software engineer? Because you also talk to them, I assume, right? As a SE, simple SE.
Yeah.
Or how do you prove? What's the data? Because we always talk about AWS, Amazon itself being a data-driven company, right? Everything needs to be proven by data. Like words do not count, actual facts. How do you? What kind of metrics do you use to show I'm not a mid-level developer anymore. I'm a senior developer anymore.
So I cannot comment a lot on the SDs because I was not
solution architect
myself. But usually it depends, or it depends. It relates to level of ambiguity and complexity you're dealing with. So have you solved, and also the level of independence that you can work on those tasks. So did I need a lot of guidance to solve that architectural problem for the customer, or did I come up completely on my own, right? So this proves certain points. Then level of impact, obviously, right? If I do one thing for, as I said, going on a conference and enable hundreds of customers at the same time, right? Then I might have a broader impact. So I would just say the scope of the role then broadens, right? And your level of complexity and ambiguity also that you're dealing with are increasing. And if you can show that you are on top of that and you can handle it, right? Then those are indications that you might be on the next level. And then usually if you have then a very good manager, right? It supports you about the process, also reflects with you. Hey, where are we? Do you think we can go the next step, right? Things like that. So you have this open conversation, and your manager really helps you developing yourself and growing into those next roles.
Nice. Interesting facts about the world of AWS, and I believe it's easy to spot the difference between the companies we are used to and the big ones, and the way they approach things, the way they measure things, and where the weight is in certain decisions, in certain processes. So what, and that's actually my second to last question. What would somebody need as an expertise, as a drive, or what can you give a viewer? Let's say little John is looking at you, right? And he says like, hey, I'm in software for X time. I would want to get Max's job. What's what you can give him to say, hey, if you would do that, right? These kind of guiding principles, you would be able to get into my role.
Yeah, so I would say it's, at least for me personally, it was passion. So I like to do those things a lot. So for me, it was always more than a job. So I also read things about it in after work, for so to say. So I really thought it's a really good fit for myself. So I like to do those things a lot. So therefore, I put a lot of passion into it. I would say what we have discussed already, right? So already try to start doing the things today that you really want to do then also in the future, and try to get better at it. Try to get on top of, specifically when we talk about architects. So for me personally, as I said, I find that having that hands-on experience before for a couple of years really helps me to make architectural decisions a lot easier. And then building on top of that with reading things about patterns. So there are a lot of great books out there that talk about architectural concepts. Try to apply them then maybe in your company or where you work already. Try to work on it. Try to also I think one of the most important parts is also not always seeing the advantages of certain technologies, but actually the disadvantages or the challenges. Because oftentimes you hear architects, oh, this is that's the best thing I've ever heard in my entire life. So we're using it for 100% of all of our services. And that's usually that's not how it works. So usually there's always some trade-off decision in between. So try to get that sense on when you have to make those trade-offs, what are the reasons you are making those trade-offs, and try to apply them on real examples. And then if you get more and more confident, right, you can handle those situations much better, and then you're also much better prepared for maybe interviewing for that specific role. So for me, at least, it was a big portion was the experience that I gathered and the learnings that I put into, so I could prove that then also in the whole interview cycle. So yeah, just my colleague always says, so follow your heart. So whenever you feel like, okay, I really want to do that, then there's some sort of passion behind it. And that usually keeps you going to pursue the way to go. So if your goal is to work at AWS, right, then look at the role description, what it takes to be, practice that, right? There are a lot of articles also for interviews of what it takes to be a solutions architect, a lot of videos also on YouTube. See also if that's a good fit for you, if you want to work like that, and then work backwards then also from there and seeing what would it take me now to get there.
Does it help to be AWS certified, or is it something that's...
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. So there is also associate solutions architect and professional. However, I wouldn't do the certification just for the sake of the certification. So if does it help in a sense that because it's on my CV, it would help me, then that doesn't. So you really need to show that you understand it. So I think doing the certification just of having a badge is the wrong motivation, right? But if you have that passion, if you want to be an architect, then you usually also want to stand it really deeply on what you're doing there, not for the sake of a certification. So it can be a good mental model, and it can be a good let's say blueprint on what are certain tasks you might be dealing with. But then just be aware there's also things outside of the certification that you might to be probed against. So yes, it can be a good thing, but I think usually mixed with real world experience, and even better applied to real world experience. I mean, one important part maybe to mention is you don't have to be an AWS expert to join AWS. Maybe this is a very key part for me, because personally,
this is something I didn't ask, and this is actually so you don't need to.
I had zero clue before joining AWS or on doing a lot of things with AWS. I knew mostly on the architectural concepts and how they apply and what are the trade-offs of the technologies also behind it, but I was by far not an expert, and having worked in a DevOps team for 5 years deploying all of that in production, so to say. I mean, not all of it, obviously. Yeah. So this is usually not the prerequisite, and because if you have this architectural thinking and the knowledge maybe on another platform, you can apply it to then the specific environment, and then you can build on top of that from there.
Awesome. Yeah. So then last question. Another obvious one, I believe, is the first one as well. Why are you here? Like, what brings you to Timișoara?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm here so tomorrow we have an AWS user group in Timișoara. And I've seen from the last couple of iterations, it's been quite popular also. So I will do a talk there on navigating the AWS messaging landscape. So I will talk about patterns for messaging, and then see how those patterns could be implemented with specific AWS services. So we'll talk about queuing, talk about event-driven architectures, we talk about orchestration, and then just share a bit the knowledge on how I see also on real-world customer examples, then what is used and when does it make the most sense. And apart from that, I'm also meeting customers here and helping them with a few of their architectural challenges that they have.
And you are two, right? It's you and your colleague?
Yes, my colleague
Dio.
Do you know
also what your colleague is talking about tomorrow?
Yeah, Dio will talk about hybrid cloud. So we'll shed some light onto things like AWS Outposts, local zones, Snowball, family, and everything related to that. So it would be quite interesting as well.
Awesome. So then I hope you have a lot of people at the meetup. So thanks, Max, for accepting the invitation. Good luck tomorrow to you and your colleague. Thanks for listening. And that was all for this episode. We will continue, as you know, most probably the next one with Startup Chronicles. See you there. Hopefully you will join the meetup tomorrow. And another important message is we have a huge community in Timișoara that is not necessarily an active community. So it's really important in order to grow as a city of technology, as an engineering hub for companies, also internal companies as external companies. It is important for us to be there, learn new things, be part of the community, come to meetups, do networking. So I really encourage you to come, not only AWS user group, there is also Team.js, there are other awesome meetups that happen here in our community. So join them, take 1-2 hours, do interactions, do networking afterwards, because it will help you, your career, and it will help us all in the city. Thanks again, and don't forget, if you want to still get a discount at I Love Failure, Raul20 is still available as a discount code. Use it wisely. So thanks again, thanks Max, and see you next time.
Thank you.